welcome back still here on Business Morning, discussing current and relevant issues. One of those current issues is the removal of subsidy on petrol and the impact it's having on you, on your pockets, your spending every day. And we've had a lot of talks about palliatives that could buffer some of those harsh realities that we now face after petrol has gone as high, at least in Lagos, 488 naira for a litre. And we've seen, of course, the spillover effects on transport, food prices, everything. So now let's have joining us to discuss some of those possible palliatives that may be able to buffer that impact on you, on your household, and on businesses. Let's discuss this with Mr. Dr. Peter Bankole. He's the director at Enterprise Development Center at Lagos Business School. Thank you so much, Dr. Bankole, for your time this morning. I know you've also been feeling the pinch, but in case you live in another part of the country where you're not feeling it, how has this changes buying petrol at least 488 naira for a litre? How has it changed your lifestyle? How has it changed your spending?
Okay, thank you very much for having me on the program. Indeed, things have changed, and they will still continue. In the first time I filled my tank, it was 3 times what I used to fill it with. And so I had to do a mental calculation very quickly as to how I move, where I go, and it has to be planned. That's just the reality. And so from my house to the university, which I'm now, I have left Enterprise Development Center. I'm now at the main university. And it takes about 3 hours because of the traffic and everything. So I have to spend time on campus rather than going back and forth every day. That is the reality. And that is what some of us have to go through. But it is tough.
All right, so tell us, we know that the government, I think they're meeting today to discuss some of those palliatives. We had a lot of people from the oil and gas sector to discuss possible palliatives that could run deep down to meet a larger population of Nigeria to buffer some of this impact. What, from your perspective, can be so all-encompassing, or maybe not all-encompassing, but at least cover majority of the population?
Okay, so I'm going to divide it into 2. There is the individual side, and there is also the business side. When we go to the level of individuals, the real driver happens to be transportation. In the last few weeks, transportation has more than doubled in most cases. And if you consider somebody going to work and spending something like 2,000 naira a day only on transport, it means to start with, that person has spent 50,000 on transportation alone. We're not even talking about feeding, we're not talking about anything. So that means the minimum wage does not make sense anymore. And so 2 things, or maybe 3, will happen. The first is this palliative that we're talking about must have be driven around transportation. What do I mean by that? So government must make transportation available, accessible, easy for people. If you leave it 100% in the hand of the private sector, then we are all going to pay for it. Now, what that means is that, you know, mass transit buses should be made available. I know that in Lagos, for instance, they are already testing electronic vehicles about 3-4 weeks ago, starting from Oshodi. Now, it's still in its infancy. They should drive that one very seriously, whereby you have, you know, people able to board buses across country, across states, and indeed across country for lesser price. That is where they need to introduce it. But if you are going to rely using the private buses and everything, it is not going to happen. Minimum wage will have to go to at least 100,000 a month.
And that, of course, comes with its own consequences. But I mean, I thought that was for individuals. What about for businesses? Issues of taxes, can it come in?
Now, so for businesses, it's a double-edged sword. Government cannot say we are not going to collect taxes because taxes is a primary way of also getting revenue. But they could have something like a tax break. And for you to have a tax break, you have to be registered. So if I run a company today and I say I want to take part in this palliative process, then I need to register. If I register, let's say over the next 6 months or so, whilst we are struggling and making things to balance, then government can give me some tax concessions over that period. But once that is done, and that 6 months give them the opportunity to deep dive, especially in the area of transportation, generally for the masses, we could look at things like even food. In developed economies, agriculture and co are subsidized, and that means everybody will benefit. So we need to begin to look at that very, very fast. But it's going to take us 3 to 6 months. That's why I said over that period, we can give businesses some kind of relief, but you have to be registered. Now, registering them means that everybody's going to be in the tax net. And that's also okay, because then they can do fairly quickly, bring as many people as possible into the tax net. When majority are paying, then it makes more sense. The reality is that people that are paying taxes today, they are few, and the burden is heavy. And in order to reduce that burden, you need to have many more people into that net. This is a way of bringing them in. At the end of the day, the reality is that we also, as businesses, must change our business model. For instance, instead of working Monday to Friday, physical, we could choose to go to work maybe physical 2 or 3 times in a week. That will save. It's called blended approach. And this is already happening in most developed countries anyway. Then you have to make sure that you put, you ring fence people that are working in this way. It also means that we must have very strong internet access across locations. And more importantly, business will have to rethink whether they want to stay in highbrow areas. So if you are in VI today or Ikoyi, perhaps you want to relocate to Lekki. Perhaps you want to relocate to somewhere that is less expensive, and then your staff can live around those areas. These are things that we need to come to terms with, is the realities of time.
Yeah, realities indeed, Dr. Bamkale. Thank you so much for those suggestions. We do hope that all this will be taken into consideration, both by the government and even by employers and entrepreneurs in the country, because sounds like it could give some buffer, even though some of those would be expensive. Relocating a business, for instance, will also take a lot of planning and capital. But thank you for sharing your thoughts with us this morning, Dr. Peter Bamkale.
Thank you so much for having me.